Hey YouTube, today on In the Shop, I'm going to teach you what I use to diagnose oil leaks. Now, this can be used on engine oil, transmission oil, can even be used on fuel, power steering leaks, and they even make one for air conditioning. Stay tuned. So sometimes oil leaks can be a really tricky thing to find. You can spend a lot of time looking, and a lot of times the whole engine is covered in oil, so it can be really tricky to narrow down where exactly it comes from. So the easiest way that I found is to use this dye. Now this is a UV reactive dye that can be added to engine oil, transmission fluid, fuel, power steering fluid, pretty much any petroleum-based product besides brake fluid. Definitely not usable in the brake system. But they also make one that can be used in your refrigerant, and I believe they also make one for the cooling system. Just make sure that you get the proper dye for what you're trying to diagnose. So how this works is you take a bottle. Now if you're anywhere in like the 0 to maybe 8 quart range, one bottle should do the trick. Anything above that, you really should use 2 bottles. But you take this, pour it into your system, let it run, let it get warm, and then you take these yellow glasses here and you use a UV light, and the dye will show up like a bright neon yellow. So what I got here, I got a couple of mason jars. I got some engine oil. I'm going to pour them in. I'm going to pour one in, just straight oil, and then I'll pour another one in, and I'll add some dye in, and I'll let you guys see exactly what we got going on. So like I said, in smaller systems, you know, a regular 4-cylinder engine, even a V8 gasoline engine, you can use just one bottle of this dye. It's pretty potent stuff. In the larger systems, you definitely want to use more than one bottle. If you start to get into the 18-wheeler stuff where they're using gallons of oil, then obviously you're going to want to use multiple bottles. But this stuff is perfectly safe. It won't harm your engine or your power steering system whatsoever. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour it in one bottle, and I'm going to mix it up, and then I'm going to leave this other one just straight oil, and then we'll shine the UV light on them so we can see the difference of exactly what this dye does. So you can already see there's a difference between these two jars. This is the one with the dye. We added about half a bottle. It's probably overkill to say this is only 1 quart of oil, but it definitely adds to the effect so you can see exactly what's going on. And then this one has none. You can already see that this is a nice neon green color. The real magic happens when we turn the lights off and use a pair of glasses, and then you can really see what this stuff is doing. So let's turn these lights off and see what we got. So you can really see the oil with the dye in it just lights up nice and bright. It's like a yellowy neon green color. And then the one on the left here that's just regular engine oil, it's a little bit more of a opaque color. So here I went and took a little bit, dipped my finger in each jar, and you can see the one on the left is the plain engine oil. And the one on the right is the oil with the dye in it. The thinner it gets, the more obvious it is. So as you can see, I mean, it starts to show a little trail of that oil running down. This is what you want to look for. So let's go ahead and pull a truck in and give this a shot. So today we have a Ford 6-liter diesel in the shop, and these take a little bit more oil. They take about 15 quarts of oil, so you kind of got to double up the batch. So you're going to use 2 bottles on a diesel engine or anything that has a higher oil capacity, and that helps disperse the dye throughout the entire system. So before you run the truck, you're going to want to make sure that you kind of clean off all the residual oil. Kind of makes the leak a little easier to find. This truck, I know it's coming from the top of the engine, so you want to start at the top, get as much cleaned off as possible. I like to use brake parts cleaner. You can use a nice engine degreaser if you can get to a car wash or something. Just make sure you're being environmentally friendly. Don't go washing all the oil down into your driveway and out into the storm drains. Just do it the responsible way. But I like to use brake parts cleaner, and I put some absorbent mats under the truck to pick up the oil that I'm dripping down, and just get it nice and clean. So once you get it all cleaned off, next thing to do is let's fire this thing up. We're going to run it, get it up to operating temperature, kind of keep an eye on it, make sure that it's not a humongous leak. If it's a really large leak, it's going to be pretty obvious where it's coming from. But if you got a small leak, sometimes you really got to get the engine warm, get that oil thinned out, and let it start leaking out of where it's coming from. Now, this should go without saying, but just make sure you're doing this either outside or put an exhaust hose on it. I don't want anybody running their cars or trucks in the garage. So let's get a hose on this truck, get it fired up, and see if we can find this leak. So as the vehicle's running, you're going to start to look for traces of the dye. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to show this on camera, but on this particular vehicle we ended up finding that the oil pressure sensor was leaking, and also the turbo oil drain tube. It's not uncommon to have more than one leak source, so just because you verify one doesn't mean you don't have another. Just keep checking, make sure you get them all. Sometimes we found in some instances that the vehicle won't leak if it's just sitting idling, so you'll have to take it for a drive, pull it back into the shop, recheck it again. My only suggestion is don't let it go too long before you pull it back in, because what can happen is if it's a decent sized leak, the oil can get everywhere, which means the dye is all over the place and you're right back to square one trying to figure out where the leak originated from. So just let it run, be persistent. Don't be afraid to get in there, and sometimes you got to shut the truck off or shut the car off and take some stuff apart to get access to the areas that are harder to see. Don't be afraid to dive in. Well guys, I really hope this helped. Sometimes these oil leaks can be really tricky to find, and this one, it wasn't the most obvious here on camera. It can be a little bit tricky to show, but in real life when you see this dye coming out, it's very obvious where it's coming from. So don't be concerned if you don't see dye. You haven't found the leak. I mean, this stuff is really, really bright. You can get these from, I got this light from Harbor Freight a while ago. It's really not that bright. They have some better ones on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description, and I'll also put a link to some of these dyes. Just make sure you follow the manufacturer's instructions on the particular dye that you get. Most of them are pretty much the same, but just make sure you're using the right quantity of dye for the amount of oil or fluid that you have in the system. So I really hope this helped, guys. I know, I mean, time is money, or even sometimes it's a matter of if you're doing this in your own driveway, saving a little bit of time so you can get back to, hanging out with your family or doing the lawn or whatever it may be. Chasing an oil leak can be a really frustrating thing. So if this helped, guys, make sure you subscribe, like the video, leave me a comment if there's anything else you guys want to see, or even if you have a different way of finding an oil leak. I'd love to hear from you guys. Once again, thanks for watching In the Shop.